Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of An American in Thailand, airing every Friday. This program is broadcast from Ratchamakan, University of Technology, Peranakan, and it will come to you in two parts. For the first part, I'll introduce you to a certain topic about being an American here living in Thailand. Could be about food or travel or culture, anything like that. We'll then take a break, and in the second part of our program, we'll get into more examples or specifics. All right, let's get to the program. Welcome, everyone. My name is Gary Gray, and I am your host for An American in Thailand. I am an American English teacher here at Ratchamakan University of Technology, Peranakan, and I have been teaching here for over 8 years. And since I've been here so long, I have a pretty good idea of the cultural differences between Thailand and America. I'm still learning. I'm not perfect on my Thai culture, so if I say anything incorrect during our presentations during this program, please don't take offense. You can let me know. You can correct me. I will not take offense at being corrected. I'm still learning, and there may be some things, especially out in the countryside, that may be different than the city areas that I may not be aware of. I do love the countryside. I prefer the countryside, so I do try to get out there sometimes, but it's a little difficult. I don't have my own car or even my own motorbike, and most stuff is in the city, and my job is in the city, so yeah, I mostly spend time in the cities. So that's kind of my sense of culture. I certainly have been around some of the more rural areas enough to get a feel for the culture out there as well. So like I said, I think I have a pretty good idea of Thai culture, but I am still learning, so I try not to get things wrong. But if I do get something wrong, don't be offended and feel free to correct me. So, for today's topic, we're going to be talking about something cultural related. And what we're going to talk about today is relationships. The difference between the relationships in America versus Thailand. And actually, we're going to talk about a lot of similarities. I think you'll find that they're surprisingly similar, because there are bigger differences in other parts of the world. There are some huge differences in other parts of the world. So what do I mean we're talking about relationships? Well, what I mean is I'm talking about, like, your relationship with your significant other. We will also talk about your relationship with your family. That's what I mean with relationships. Okay, so we're talking about your personal relationships. Your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife, that sort of relationship. Also, your parents, your children, your aunts, your uncles, whatever it is. So we'll talk about how those kind of function differently between America and Thailand. And I'm not going to get too deep into it. It's a pretty short program, and I mean, we could talk about lots of small details about, like, how the traditional role of a woman or a man in a marriage, and it's how it's different. We're not between Thailand and America. We're not going to get into all of that detail. I'm actually going to use some statistics so that I know I have my facts right. And we're going to do that in the first half of the program. We'll take a look at some statistics. And then in the second half of the program, we'll kind of go through those in a little more detail and discuss why they are. Why it is what it is. And because some of those are related to culture. In fact, a couple of them which almost seem to not make sense because they kind of go against each other. They seem to be two things which should go hand in hand. And you'll see what I mean when we talk about it. But for one of these statistics, it's higher in Thailand. And for the other statistic, it's higher in America. Well, that seems like it doesn't make sense. They seem like they're related. I think there's a reason. And we'll talk about that. Okay? So again, in the first part, we're just going to go over some statistics. And then in the second part, we'll discuss them more, and especially in terms of culture. Okay, so first of all, let's start with, and again, we're going to focus on statistics. There's only one fact I'm going to put in here that's not really based on a statistic. It's just based on my kind of observations. All right? And once again, we're going to save the details for the second part of the program. So I'm not going to discuss this too much. I will mention a couple of things about some of these statistics, just so that you understand them. Like there's one of them that seems much higher in Thailand than in America. But it's important to know that the American number is still pretty high. And that is one of those numbers where I said one was high in Thailand, one's high in America. The other one also is actually still fairly high in Thailand, even though Thailand has the lower number. Okay, so let's get to this. So we're going to start out first with relationships like having to do with your significant other, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, your wife. All right, so the age of the first marriage, because of course some people get divorced and they might marry again later. So your first time getting married. In Thailand, that age is about 27. And in America, that age is about 30. And so that's one where the statistics are pretty similar. That's pretty reasonable. That's pretty similar. I mean, there's a little bit of difference there. A little bit older in America. But 27 versus 30, pretty similar. And as we'll discuss in the second part of the program, that's actually much different in some other countries. So that's why I'm kind of emphasizing the similarities here. Okay, so now we talked about marriage. Now what about getting divorced? Okay, so the divorce rate in Thailand is 25%. And in America, it's 45%. So that does seem much higher in America. And it is, really. I mean, it's 20% higher, right? That's much higher. That's much higher, especially since they're getting married a few years later. That seems really high. But I should point out that compared to some other parts of the world, the Thailand number is still a little bit high. It's not crazy high, but it's still a little bit high. Also, that American number has been coming down. Still quite high. 45% is high. That's almost half. But the number actually used to be half. It was about 50% or even slightly higher at one point. So that number has been coming down. So America is coming down with the divorce rate, getting closer to Thailand. But there is still a pretty big difference here. Now, what's interesting is the next statistic. This is the one where I said they're kind of swapped. And that's the rate of infidelity. Infidelity means cheating on your partner. Now, of course, they get this information by polling people. The polls are anonymous. In other words, people don't have to give their names. But still, you have to imagine some people aren't going to admit to it. And that could affect the numbers. Being willing to admit to it could even be culturally related. So you don't really know how reliable these numbers are. But what's interesting is that in Thailand, it's higher than in America. You would think with the divorce rate so high in America that the infidelity rate must be higher as well. It's one of the number one reasons to get divorced, right? Well, the infidelity rate in Thailand is 51%. It's the highest in the world, which is kind of scary, actually. And in America, it's about 39%. So what's interesting there, and again, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but just to compare, we're going to talk more about the culture in the second half. But this is just a numbers comparison, so I do want to compare the numbers here a little bit. What's so interesting about that is notice that in America, the infidelity rate and the divorce rate is very similar. 39%, 45%. And of course, as I said, some people aren't going to admit to it, so the infidelity rate's probably higher than 39%. So you're probably talking about the infidelity rate and the divorce rate being almost identical, which is amazing because there certainly are other reasons to get divorced. Now, of course, some people, there's infidelity in their marriage, they forgive their partner, they stay together anyway. So, of course, you get some of the opposite going on there as well. So this isn't exactly a one-to-one correlation there. It's not like every single person with infidelity ends up getting divorced. It's just interesting how close those two numbers are. And in Thailand, they're wildly different. Wildly different. The infidelity rate is extremely high, and yet a lot of those people don't get divorced. Divorce rate 25%. Still on the highest side compared to some other parts of the world, but much lower than America. So, interesting. And we'll talk about the cultural reasons for that in the second part. And I'll be honest with you, with this one, I'm not sure I know 100% of the cultural reason why that is. But I have some ideas. Okay, LGBTQ rate. Here's another one that's going to be really similar. It's 10% in Thailand, 11% in America. Now, of course, this is only people who are willing to admit to it again, just like the infidelity. So the real rate is probably higher than that. But that's what the numbers of people who will admit to it say. And I will tell you that that's higher than most countries. But again, you're talking about people being willing to admit to it. There are many countries in the world where it's actually straight up outlawed, where it's against the law to be LGBTQ. And so very few people are going to admit it. And so the rates come in much lower. The rate really, honestly, is probably exactly the same in the entire world. I mean, I know some people debate it, but being a member of the community myself, I can tell you it's something you're born with, and so people are no different. The rate's going to be pretty much the same in every country. It's just whether or not people are willing to admit it. And so you see that in Thailand and America, we have about the same rate of people open enough to say that they are. What is interesting, however, is that in the T part of that, the trans plus people that say they're non-binary, which is important because this pushes the numbers up a little bit, especially for America. The trans rate in America is very low. But if you add in non-binary, you get a little bit more. Now, a lot of older people don't even know what non-binary is. If I asked my mom that, she probably wouldn't know. And I'm old myself. I probably only know because I'm a member of the community. So the trans and non-binary rate in Thailand is 5%, and America it's about 2%. So that's interesting that there's a difference there. Okay, that's interesting. Even though the LGBTQ total is the same. Is about the same. So we'll talk about that again in the second part. Now some statistics on family relations, like brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, things like that. Okay, so the size of a family. In Thailand, there's about 1.2 children per family. In America, it's about 1.6. Now, obviously, you cannot have a fraction of a child. These are the averages. So in other words, if you take 5 families in Thailand, this person has 1 kid, this family has 1 kid, this family has 1 kid, this family has 1 kid, and this family has 2 kids. The average is 1.2. Okay, and in America, the average is 1.6. Now, those are weird because they're very similar and very different. What I mean by that is there are a lot of countries in the world kind of in this range. And so America's at the higher end of the range, Thailand's at the lower end of the range, and there's a whole bunch of countries in between. And so if you were to look at a list of all the countries in the entire world and how many kids they have, you're going to see America is way higher on the list than Thailand. But if you actually get like to the higher part of the list, you'll see it's way more than 1.6. So really, America and Thailand are quite similar on this. America's a little higher, but just a little bit. All right. And one of the things I wanted to look at, because I know having multi-generational homes is more common in Thailand. Like the children are supposed to take care of the parents and things like that. And we don't see that as much in America. But then you'd be moving back in with them if you were going to do that later in life. So that's not really leaving home. But I think some Thai people may just stay at their parents' house for their whole life. So this one's kind of a hard one. I kind of wondered when Thai people tend to leave home versus when Americans do. There's no good hard facts, statistics on this, but there are some general guidelines. And it's around 22 to 25 years old for Thai people and 24 to 27 years old for American young people. And that one actually surprised me a little bit. Like I said, because of the multi-generational households being a little more common in Thailand, although as I get into more explanation in the second half, I'll explain why in America that's increasing. But because it's more common here in Thailand, I thought that might push those statistics up, push those numbers up. I do know why. I am pretty sure I know why it's a little higher in America. But it still surprised me at first when I saw it. All right, and the last thing, which is not really a statistic, this is the one thing I've just noticed generally, culturally, is that in Asian cultures, it does seem like people are closer to their more extended family, like cousins, aunts, uncles, things like that. It's not to say that we don't care about our aunts and uncles and cousins. I just called my aunt a little while ago because there was a problem in the family. I wanted to give her a call, see how she was doing. I just called her not too long ago. So we absolutely care about our extended families. I'm in contact with cousins on Facebook all the time. So we definitely care about them. But it seems like they're a little closer. That family unit is a little tighter in a lot of the Asian countries that I visited. All right, so those are all of our kind of statistics. Again, that last one, not a statistic, but those are all of our statistics. So let's go ahead and take a quick break now, and we'll come back with a little more detail. All right, let's take a break. All right, welcome back, everyone. Okay, so we're talking about relationship differences and similarities. Really, the similarities are more than you might expect between Thailand and America. So the first half, we ran through some statistics. I want to talk about why now in this second half. Now, that first half did take me a little longer than I expected, so we're going to try to keep this kind of short. But I will say that the main overriding reason why I think these numbers are more similar than you might expect, the divorce rate and infidelity is a little bit, well, there's some pretty significant differences there, but most of them are pretty similar. Why? I think it's because in a general sense, both countries, like in a social sense, we're relatively modern, but still have some traditional values, some traditional roots. And so we have kind of this similar kind of balance. There are some areas of the world where they might be more progressive on their socially, like in Europe. And there are other parts of the world, like the Middle East and Africa, where they are more traditional, because some of these numbers are very different in those countries, in those parts of the world. In Europe, for example, like the infidelity and divorce rates aren't that much higher, even though they're more progressive. But what you see is you do see higher marriage ages. I mean, some of those countries have pretty surprisingly high ages for the first time getting married, like in the mid-30s. I mean, that's obviously mid-30s is not old. I'm much older than that. But for the first time getting married, that's pretty old. So I think that's why America and Thailand are fairly similar with most of these numbers, is that there's this balance of factors, this kind of progressive nature socially, but yet still a little bit traditional. Now, our traditional might come from different areas. For example, in America, with Christianity being their main religion, that's kind of anchoring the traditional nature there. And here in Thailand, it might be more the Buddhist traditional nature. So, and the Buddhist and Christian traditions obviously vary somewhat. Obviously not the same religion. So there's some differences there. But still, that kind of general, traditional, family-centered idea. And so we end up with very similar numbers. So let's quickly go through these. Again, I want to be pretty quick about this. Let's quickly go through these and let's discuss why. So the age of the first marriage, it's a little bit older in America. I think that's because more Americans attend college or university than they do here in Thailand, and most people don't want to get married while they're still at school. And by the way, we will jump to the very last item on the list as well. That thing I told you that wasn't real. The one I told you about that didn't have great statistics on it, but we have some ideas, and that's when young people leave home, and that's a little bit younger here in Thailand. Again, I think that's because they're done with school. They finish school earlier here in Thailand because a lower percentage of young people go to university, and so. Now, going to university, sometimes you're leaving home in America, like I did. But you can live at home while attending university, depending on where your university is. So generally, that's going to push that number up. So more people stay home, more young people stay living at home longer in America. All right, now the divorce rate and infidelity rate, that was the one that was weird because it was kind of opposite in the two countries. So the real mystery here is Thailand. There's no mystery in America. Infidelity rate, divorce rate, about the same. And the infidelity rate is high in both. Even though it's quite a bit higher in Thailand, I should point out that after Thailand, it drops off, the rate drops off pretty quickly. So that 39% for America is still among some of the top infidelity rates. So people are not very good about being faithful in either country. So why is the divorce rate? So the real question then is, why is the divorce rate so low in Thailand? The only thing I can think of is two reasons. One of them is one that I maybe don't understand, and that is that it could be part of the belief system here in Thailand. Because again, I was not raised Buddhist. I don't know if there's anything in Buddhism about that. But it could be part of the belief system. We have that within some branches of Christianity as well, but it's not the major branch of Christianity that exists in America. And that is people who are really strict Catholics, which is part of the Christian faith. They don't believe in divorce, so they may not get divorced. So I don't know. Maybe there's something like that in Thailand, but again, I don't understand that exactly because I'm not Buddhist myself, so I could be wrong about that. And I apologize if I am wrong. The other thing could be that, generally speaking, Thailand is viewed as being pretty open, at least by the rest of the world. Maybe Thai people don't consider themselves to be like this themselves, but the way the rest of the world views it, yeah, Thailand is viewed as being pretty open when it comes to matters related to sex. So perhaps infidelity is just not seen as quite as big of a deal here. I know it's still a big deal. When it happens to one of my friends from Thailand and I see them posting on Facebook, oh, it sure bothers them. It's still a big deal. It's still a big deal. But maybe just not quite as big of a deal as it is in other countries. And so, if it happens, maybe people are just able to get over it more easily, and so they stay married with their partner. Okay, now the LGBTQ rate is pretty much the same, which I thought was interesting, because again, Thailand seems to be a little more open. And remember, this is people who are willing to admit it. So I thought Thailand would actually be a little higher. America was 1% higher, which is pretty much just statistical noise. It's not really higher. They're basically the same. But still, America wasn't lower. I expected America to be a little bit lower. And I did expect America to be at about 10%, but I would have expected Thailand to be a little bit higher. What's also interesting is that the trans non-binary rate is at 5% in Thailand. So that's almost half of the LGBTQ community. And I see that even just as a teacher at the university. I see that. I don't want to draw conclusions based on how people look. That would be wrong to do. But I'm just guessing based on how they present themselves, how they dress, makeup, whatever. I do see that, boy, a large percentage of those students that I have that are LGBTQ, and again, I don't even know who they all are because it's not like they announce it, but the ones that I am pretty sure about, at least, a lot of them do seem to, again, I don't want to be judgmental because I'm basing this, I don't have these conversations with my students, of course. So I'm just based on how they present themselves. A lot of them seem to be kind of in that trans non-binary group. So it's just very interesting that in Thailand, nearly half the LGBTQ community is in that trans non-binary group, whereas in America, it's only about 20% of them. Okay, so that's an interesting difference there. And I think a lot of that does have to do with acceptability. I know a lot of, well, not a lot, because I don't know that many, and again, they don't make up that many. There's only 2%. But I know several trans folks in America who didn't accept the trans part of themselves until later in life. Prior to that, they just said they were gay. And so I think this has to do with acceptability. And I think the Thai society is a little more open and accepting about that. All right, so now the statistics on family relations. Now, the children per family, I mentioned this already in the first part, that the difference, if you were just to look at a ranking, looks like it's huge. America is way higher than Thailand is. But really, we're very much in kind of a similar grouping. A lot of Southeast Asia, a lot of Europe, a lot of North America is kind of in that same group. And what you'll see is birth rates a lot higher in parts of like Africa or even parts of South and Central America. Not all of them. Some of them are right there in the same group with the U.S., Thailand, Europe, those areas. So that's another area in which we're very similar. And I think it makes sense because Thailand is still a developing country. It's not fully developed yet, but at least like in the cities and things like that, it's fairly well developed. It's getting there. So we're kind of on that same level. Whereas in poorer countries, usually the birth rate's going to be a lot higher for two reasons. First of all, unfortunately, sadly, some of your children might die because young kids either right at birth, like infant deaths, or young kids like malnourished or whatever, those people dying is more common. And so you want to have another child because you lost that one. Also, another thing is that they don't have as easy access to birth control. And so they tend to have more children in a lot of poorer countries. And so you see that we're kind of on the same level here. In fact, we actually have more children in America than they do in Thailand, which is a little surprising. Okay. And so then the last one is the one that I don't have a statistic for, and that's the one with Asian cultures being a little closer with their distant relatives. I think that may be in part due to the smaller family sizes. As I just mentioned, in Thailand, there's only 1.2 children per family. So it is a little lower than America. Not much lower. Again, we're in that same kind of group there, but it is a little bit lower. And in China, for example, where I also noticed this to be the case, they had the one child policy for a long time. So you could only have one child. So families were small. And so when your family is that small, we all want to have connections, right, to family. So when your immediate family is so small, you kind of spread out your circle a little bit. So you bring in your aunts, your uncles, your cousins. In fact, I've seen a lot of people especially in China, but even here in Thailand, sometimes call a cousin their sister or brother. We almost never do that in America. Your cousin's your cousin. That's it. We don't change what we call them. So, all right. So we went through that pretty quickly, but we've gone a little bit long here, so I wanted to go through that pretty quickly. So let's just wrap this up. What I think is most interesting is really how similar our relationships are between America and Thailand. And you may say, well, they're not all that similar. Like we talked about the divorce rate, the infidelity rate, they're not all that similar. And of course, our cultural differences are pretty big. But again, I think it's that overarching culture where it's a little bit progressive, a little bit traditional. It's that balance. Because I will tell you that in other parts of the world, some of this data is much different. The Middle East and Africa, for example, the age of first marriage is much younger than it is in Thailand or America. And it's because some of those countries, they either have arranged marriages or getting married and having the family is like the number one most important thing you could possibly do. Not going off to university, not your job, nothing like that. And so basically, as soon as you're an adult, boom, it's time to get married and have kids. And so they end up having more kids as well. As I mentioned, like in Africa, they generally have higher birth rates than in Thailand or America. So it's kind of this balance that both of our cultures have. So yes, our cultures are very different, but kind of at their roots, they have this same base of this balance between being very modern with some traditional values kept in there. And so most of these numbers are quite similar, which I think is very interesting. And I think it's one of the reasons that Americans and Thai people kind of get along so well, because we basically have the same expectations when it comes to family or relations. I mean, maybe the infidelity one's a little bit, that one's a little different, where the infidelity rate is so high in Thailand, and yet the divorce rate is not. So I don't know. Maybe infidelity is more acceptable here in Thailand. I don't know. I don't want to say that because I don't want to say something that's incorrect about that, because most people view infidelity as a bad thing. So saying it's acceptable is probably not very accurate, but maybe tolerated a little bit more. I don't know. It's hard for me to say. That number is a little bit odd as it compares to America. That's really the only one. That's the only thing on here. And what I would say is it's really that divorce rate that's a little odd. That's the one I don't really get. The infidelity rate, as I mentioned, in America is still very high. Even though it looks low compared to Thailand, it's just because Thailand is really high. America's number is still quite high. At 39%, that's a very high number compared to other countries. And as I mentioned, this is only going to be people who are willing to admit it. Knowing my own home country as I know it, that 39% is probably not correct. It's higher than that. So again, America and Thailand really aren't that far apart on that one. It's really the divorce rate. It's really the divorce rate where Thai people are not getting divorced at the same rate as American people are. All right, but the rest of these numbers, like I said, quite similar. And I think it's due to even though our cultures in their details are very different, I think the general idea of them, like how we view families, I think are quite similar. Families and relationships, I think is quite similar between our two countries. So that's interesting. All right. So that's going to be our episode for today. I think this was an interesting one, looking at the differences in relationships and families, and especially seeing just how similar they were. I actually had to do some research on this. I have the numbers written down here in front of me. I actually expected there to be bigger differences. The only one that really surprised me, as I mentioned, is the divorce versus infidelity rate. It seems to make sense with America. It makes less sense for me in Thailand, and so I have to think about why that is here in Thailand. That's the only one that's a little bit weird. That's it. Everything else, these are all pretty similar. Americans do leave home and get married a little bit later, but that's probably just because more Americans go to university. That's all. So they're still at school. So they live at home with their parents because they can't find any other place to live because they're going to school still. So they live at home with their parents, and they don't want to get married until they're out of school, so they wait a couple more years to get married as well. So, yeah, that's reasonable. So very few differences. Very few differences. So really interesting to see that. All right. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you for joining us for An American in Thailand. Let me reach out to any young people out there who are looking to go to university sometime soon. Why not consider our university here, RMUTP, Rajmakon, University of Technology, Peranakan. All right, please stay with us, and make sure you tune back in next week for another interesting episode. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.